You're probably wondering what I'm doing here, because it's no longer Advent. Well, first of all, a very blessed Christmas Day to you. And as an explanation, I came across a recording that was made about 23 years ago at my first parish in England, which was in the city of Woking in Surrey. And it's called The King and I, but it has nothing to do with Yul Brynner. It's the take on, well, various aspects of really the Christmas story, but from people from different eras, beginning way before the birth of Christ and finishing with what was then the present day. In other words, the late 90s, or around about 2000. So the people in it, 3 out of 4 of them are British. One of them is Scottish, so her accent is a little difficult to understand. I think you'll be okay with the other 2. The 4th person is my wonderful mother, my late mother, who you will certainly understand because she was from Wisconsin. So the musical prelude and postlude you will certainly recognize as emanating from our tremendously talented Director of Music Ministries, Heather McGonaghy. But otherwise, what you will be watching is a practically vintage 23-year-old Christmas meditation. I hope you enjoy it, and a very blessed Christmas and happy and healthy New Year.
There's nothing special about me, you understand. I'm just an ordinary cloth maker, and I've lived in Jerusalem all my life. I'm happy to get on with life, you know. My parents brought me up to live right and obey God, and that's what I try to do. My family too. We're not perfect, but I don't reckon there's anything to be ashamed about. And until recently, I never thought we'd have any problems with just getting on with it. Raising our kids, meeting at the temple with our friends, just normal life. That's what I thought anyway. But now Ahaz is in charge, and I tell you, the country is falling apart. There was a time when Jerusalem was a proud city. We paid attention to things like ancestors. It really meant something that our kings were descended from King David. And it meant something that we were the nation that God had picked to be his own. We were supposed to be his special people. Everybody knows that. You'd think we want to act special, or at least obey the 10 Commandments. But lately, it seems everybody is going mad. It never used to be this bad. But it's getting worse, just like Amos' son Isaiah said. Now, he's the one I really want to talk about. I've known Isaiah since we were kids. Not that we were what we call friends. He's from a posh family. Thinks nothing of telling King Ahaz a thing or two. but I know him well enough to talk to. Only the thing is, lately, it's Isaiah that does most of the talking. We're in a bad way, you see. For a few weeks now, the whole city has been surrounded by the Assyrian army. And Isaiah knew that this was going to happen. He knew because God had told him. Okay, maybe I laughed the first time I heard him say so, but I'm not laughing now. Isaiah saw God 6 years ago when he was praying in the temple, and God called him to be his messenger. And that's what Isaiah's been doing since then. But the thing is, nobody likes his messages. He's been telling us that the whole country is going to be destroyed, that we're going to lose everything. He says most of us are going to be killed. If we aren't killed, we're going to be captured. And if we don't get captured, we will die of disease or be burnt in a huge fire. Isaiah says that hardly anybody will be left. But those who do come back will trust God. Well, that's what we should have been doing all along. Isaiah knows what he's talking about. If only we'd turned back to God when we first started going astray, things would be fine now. And Ahaz could have saved us if he had listened to what he was saying. But Ahaz tried to negotiate with the Assyrians and asked them for help instead of asking God, as he should have done. But you know, Isaiah isn't tempted to look anywhere else for help, and he's still talking. This morning, something really strange happened. Now, as far as I can see, the line of David is finished. When Uzziah died, his son did his best. But his grandson, Ahaz, he's just a crook. So folks like me, we've pretty much given up hope. But this morning, Isaiah started talking about a new king. Somebody who's going to be descended from David after all. That's what Isaiah says. And I believe him. You want to know why I believe him? Because when Isaiah talks about this king, you get the feeling that he's already met him. That's crazy, I know. How could he have met somebody who hasn't even been born yet? But that's how it is. He's telling us about how wise this king is, and how godly, how fair, and how good. And you swear they've grown up together. And I'll tell you the strangest part. I feel that I know him too. I couldn't even tell you his name. But in my heart, you understand. In my heart, he's like a brother.
You could ask just about anybody about that night. It's not like I'm the only one who noticed. Anybody who lives in Bethlehem, anybody who was anywhere near Bethlehem. I mean, how could you miss it? Even before the shepherds started talking about what they'd seen, we knew something was happening. Something special. You couldn't miss it. Town's full of strangers right now because of the census. But even they could tell there was something different about that night. Nobody could put their finger on it. Until later. Afterwards, we were saying it felt like when there's a big storm on the way, but not quite the same, because you didn't feel scared. The air was so still, like everyone was holding their breath, and the night was so dark. And then that light appeared, all of a sudden, from nowhere. One minute it wasn't there, and the next minute it was, and it was so bright. It lit up the whole hillside like broad daylight. So a lot of us had to go outdoors. By the time my nephew came in from the field, I saw him and the other shepherds before they even reached the stable. Even then, they looked like they'd seen a ghost. But they hadn't, of course. They'd seen angels, hundreds of them, lighting up the sky. And they heard them singing, too. My nephew, he says he'll never forget that night as long as he lives. And I won't forget it either. Not ever. Oh, I know I didn't see the angels or even hear them. I wish I had. But I don't really mind, because I saw that baby. When my nephew said where they were going and what they were looking for, I had to follow them. I wasn't the only one. There must have been around 100 of us by the time we got there. To begin with, I couldn't see anything at all. We had let the shepherds go in first, you see, because they were the ones the angels sent. But after a while, the rest of us got to take turns going inside, except that once you were in there, you didn't want to go out again. I recognized the man and his wife right away. They'd arrived a few days earlier from Galilee, when all the rooms were already full. But my neighbor felt sorry for them, and then he could see she was going to have her baby any minute. So he let them use the stable. And that's where she had the baby, right there in the straw with all the animals around them and nothing but rags to wrap him in. She'd even been using the manger for a cradle. But when I saw them, he was asleep in her arms. He must have been just a few hours old, and he was beautiful. That's a strange thing to say about a newborn baby, isn't it? But it's true. He was the most beautiful child I had ever seen. The funny thing was, I didn't want to hold him, maybe because that would have crowded my view of him too much. I just wanted to look and never stop, not even to eat or sleep. And I wanted to pour out my love for him, but I couldn't think of a word to say. Seemed like I'd known him forever. I couldn't have, of course, but he felt like part of my family, part of my ancestry. My destiny, too, all wrapped up in one little baby. It's so hard to explain, but I knew he belonged to me, and I belonged to him. I knew it in my heart. I still know it. He woke up just before I went home, and when he opened his eyes, for a moment, I thought they were full of tears, caused by pain so cruel and so deep that I could hardly bear to look. But then he smiled. I thought later, he can't have smiled at me, he's much too young. But he did, you know. And it was like he had given me priceless gift.
I heard about John a long time before I met him. He lives by himself in the hill country around here. He has done since he was a kid, by all accounts. The man in the desert, that's what they call him if they don't know his name. But around here, everybody knows his name, especially the ones who remember how he got it. By rights, John should be called Zechariah after his father. His folks were really old when he was born. You'd think they'd want to make sure his name was carried on. But they were adamant. He had to be called John. And that's because an angel said so. It was like this, see? One day, when Zechariah was in the temple, an angel came to him and told him his wife was going to have a baby. Now, like I said, Elizabeth was old. Everybody figured her chance of a baby had gone long ago. But it happened, just like the angel said. Trouble was, Zechariah was a bit dubious about what the angel told him, and he was struck dumb. He couldn't talk at all, and John was 8 days old. That was the day they took the baby to the temple to name him. Elizabeth said his name would be John. But nobody believed her, so they asked Zechariah. They gave him something to write on, and sure enough he wrote, "His name is John." And that was that. Old Zechariah got his voice back, and John got his name. And a few years later, John went to live in the desert. You see, it wasn't only John's name that the angel told Zechariah about. He also said that John would be great in the sight of the Lord, and he'd be filled with the Holy Spirit. He said John would lead Israel back to God, and that he'd go ahead of the Lord to get us ready for him. Of course, that meant John himself had to be ready. So I guess you could say he went into the desert to prepare himself for the job he had to do. For one thing, the angel said that John would be teetotal, and the desert's a good place if you want to keep off the booze. But John just didn't stop with drink. He watched what he ate too. Just as long as I don't have to watch what he ate. Locusts! That was it. Locusts 3 times a day with a little wild honey for afterwards. He didn't want to overindulge himself, that's why. He didn't want any distractions from the job God gave him. No drink, no rich food, no comfortable home. Even his clothes were basic. I tell you, the man was single-minded. I've never seen anything like it. But for a while now, we started to see John down by the river. He's there every day, talking about repentance and telling us that the kingdom of heaven is near. You'd think people would be put off, wouldn't you? I mean, who likes to be reminded how bad they are? But folks are turning up in droves. They're queuing up to confess their sins and be baptized in the Jordan. I should know. I was one of them. We all thought John would sort us out, you know. He just seems so holy. Not like the rest of us. But he kept saying, no, just wait, someone else is coming. Somebody much greater than me. So we waited. And sure enough, he came. His name's Jesus. When people talk about that day, mostly they tell you about how the sky opened up and that a dove flew down and we heard God's voice. It was amazing, all right, like something you'd see in a dream. But the thing I always remember is how John looked when Jesus turned up. See, Jesus didn't make a big deal about it. He just queued up like everybody else. But John knew he was someone special. He said that Jesus should be baptizing him. But Jesus insisted. So John went ahead and pushed him under. And when he pulled him out again, and there was the sky and the dove and the voice, well, John looked like he'd found what he'd been looking for all his life. Later, he told us that Jesus existed before he was even born. Some people can't understand that, but I do, because I feel the same way. I only met Jesus that day, but it feels like I've been looking for him all my life. And now that he's here, I don't ever want to lose him.
It's Christmas time again, and I can really appreciate it for a change, because I finally managed to get my shopping done early. But it's more than that, actually. I feel completely different this Christmas. You see, in the past I was going on about the meaning of Christmas, and you know the sort of thing, it's so commercial. But the stores are more worried in profits, and the shoppers are so busy looking for bargains that, you know, they never even have time for the church. But, I mean, I'll tell you something funny. Really, I wasn't even a Christian when I said these things. Deep down, I didn't really care about the meaning of Christmas. I was just being a bit pathetic, really. So what's different about this year is that I actually really do care this year. Around 8 months ago, Jesus came into my life like an express train. It took me 30 years, but I finally realised what he did for me. And he died to save my life. When I understood that, all I wanted then was to tell him how grateful I was. I wanted everything I did and everything I said to be for him. Sort of thank you presents, really. So I worked out that the best presents I could give for him would be the times that I would, the times really that would be most like him. So that's what I tried to be. So I really thought, now how can I be most Christ-like? So I joined a group for a soup kitchen, and then I set up a few standing orders for Christian charities. And then I started visiting some people in the church who were in hospital. So at work, I completely changed my attitude. I used to be really impatient with this girl. Gosh, but then I started to be nice to her. And I quit gossiping. So I've been doing all these things for quite a while, and lots of people were benefiting. There's no doubt about that. But I actually thought, I wasn't really doing the best for Jesus. The problem was I was turning my faith into a project, trying to be hard to be like Jesus, but I wasn't giving him space to be himself. What I should have realised is that when Jesus gives us a new life, he doesn't just leave us to get on with it. It's a life we're meant to live in union with him. And it doesn't matter how good our intentions are. I think if we try to be Christians on our own, we just restrain the Holy Spirit. Big mistake. I think because when we do let Jesus get involved, we learn so much more about him. It's like having Jesus looking through your own eyes. These days I'm seeing things in new ways and reacting in new ways as well. But it feels comfortable and very familiar. I think it's like it was meant to be all along. So last week, when I went back to the soup kitchen, I didn't just feel sorry for these homeless people. I actually understood how they felt, and because Jesus was homeless too, and I felt I could really talk to them this time. And I was telling you about the girl in the office. Well, and really it wasn't just making an effort to be nice to her. I actually now feel I care for her. I actually really worry about her and how she's getting on. So everything's really different now, and much better. I'm glad I've actually got time on my hands this year, so that I can think about the meaning of Christmas, not just griping on about it. And what I've discovered, it's more than just the baby Jesus and going to church. Jesus is not a part of history. We don't just roll him out in a nativity scene or sing carols once a year. Jesus really came to live on earth as a human being, and so that we could understand him better and but he'd existed a long time before then, of course. He wasn't an idea, he wasn't a possibility, he wasn't even a promise. He was a person. He is a person. And my life would just be a waste of space without him.